Before we begin, if you enjoy sci-fi stories where humanity wins with brains instead of brute force, tap like, subscribe for more HFY tales, and drop a comment telling me which alien species you think would fear humans the most. Your support keeps these stories alive across the stars. The predator did not scream when the chains bit into its flesh. That fact alone unsettled Dr. Elias Vorn more than the creature's size, more than the layered bone plates that caught the hangar lights like dull armor, more than the way every non-human in the observation bay kept a respectful distance as if proximity itself were contagious. Silence, Elias knew, was not submission. Silence was assessment. He stood behind the transparent containment wall, hands folded behind his back, eyes tracking the shallow rise and fall of the creature's thorax. The Galactic Coalition had catalogued it as an apex combat organism, a strategic terror bred or evolved to end wars by making resistance irrelevant. Entire systems had surrendered at the rumor of its presence. Worlds had burned without ever seeing it. Now it lay shackled to a gravitic frame, blood pooling beneath it in slow viscous sheets. "They say it's dying," said Commander Halrix, his voice clipped and careful. "Poisoned by our own weapons. That irony should amuse you, Doctor." Elias did not look away from the creature. "It should worry you instead." Halrix frowned. "Explain." "The toxin isn't killing it quickly," Elias said. "It's shutting down organ clusters one by one. That suggests adaptation under stress. If it survives long enough, it will learn how to metabolize the poison. And if it doesn't? Then you'll have dissected a god and learned nothing useful." Halrix folded his arms, chitin plates rasping softly. "Your species always talks like this. Gods. Souls. Meaning." Elias finally turned. "No. My species talks about patterns. And this one is obvious." The commander hesitated, then gestured toward the chamber. "You have 6 hours. Document whatever you want before termination protocols begin." That was how humans were allowed close. Not because they were trusted, but because they were underestimated. Inside the containment chamber, the air was heavy with antiseptics and alien pheromones that scraped at Elias's sinuses. The predator's eye opened as he approached, a multifaceted orb that reflected him a dozen times over, each reflection smaller and more fragile than the last. It did not move. It did not thrash. Its gaze followed him with a precision that felt intimate. "You're not an animal," Elias said quietly, more to himself than to it. "Animals don't hold still like this." His scanner chimed, projecting a lattice of internal damage across his visor. The readings made his stomach tighten. Internal hemorrhaging. Neural inflammation. Systemic toxins spread along channels that looked disturbingly deliberate. This thing had been hunted. Elias adjusted the scanner, overriding coalition safety limits. Somewhere above, alarms flickered yellow, then green again. A technician would notice later. By then it would not matter. The predator's chest convulsed once, a controlled spasm, and a low sound vibrated through the frame. Not pain. Frustration. "I can stabilize you," Elias said. "But you need to decide not to kill me." The eye blinked. Slowly. What? That was enough. He worked with hands steadier than he felt, injecting counteragents synthesized on the fly, rerouting damaged pathways, sealing ruptures with biofoam that hissed as it bonded. The creature's physiology was a cathedral of violence refined into efficiency, but beneath it ran something almost elegant. Redundancies. Fail-safes. A mind built not just to destroy but to endure. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Outside the chamber, coalition observers argued in hushed, urgent tones. Elias ignored them. The predator's vitals climbed from catastrophic to critical, then to something that resembled stability. The bleeding slowed. The toxin retreated, confused by chemistry it had not anticipated. The predator exhaled, long and controlled, and for the first time shifted its restraints. Not to break them. To ease pressure on a healing wound. Remembered. When Elias finally stepped back, sweat cooling on his skin, he realized his hands were stained with alien blood. He did not wipe them away. "Life debt," he murmured, recalling half-forgotten xenology texts. "Let's hope your kind still believes in those." The containment field flickered as emergency power rerouted through the station. Halrix's voice crackled through the intercom, tight with disbelief. "Doctor, step away from the organism. Immediately." Elias looked at the predator one last time. The eye met his gaze, and for an instant he felt something settle into place, like a line drawn across the future. "I'm afraid," Elias said calmly, "that's no longer possible." The predator's restraints creaked, just slightly, and across the observation bay, every veteran officer present felt the same chilling realization. The war had just learned his name. The station did not announce the change, but Elias felt it in the way people stopped meeting his eyes. Technicians who had once spoken freely now fell silent when he entered a corridor. Security patrols doubled near the containment wing, their weapons carried a fraction higher, fingers closer to triggers. The Predator remained alive, stabilized but restrained, and that alone had shifted the gravity of the station. Fear had found a new center. Elias returned every day. Officially, he was monitoring toxin regression and recording physiological data. Unofficially, he was listening. The Predator did not speak in any language the Coalition recognized, but it communicated constantly. Its breathing altered when Elias approached. Its posture shifted in response to voices outside the chamber. When guards grew agitated, it turned its head just enough for them to notice, and the agitation died instantly. It was learning the station faster than the station was learning it. Elias noticed the scars during the third session. They were not random, not the chaotic markings of a creature that relied on brute force. Each scar followed a deliberate pattern, intersecting vital areas without crippling them. Ritual damage. Command markings. The sort of wounds earned by those who stood where others did not. "You're not their weapon," Elias said softly as he traced the outline with his scanner. "You're their leader." The Predator's eye rotated, focusing more sharply than before. Its pulse slowed, synchronizing with the soft hum of the containment field. Elias felt the shift like a held breath released. Coalition Command did not share his conclusions. "They are stalling," Halrick said during the briefing, mandibles tight with irritation. "Every hour this thing lives increases the probability of containment failure." "You're assuming it wants to escape," Elias replied. "And you're assuming it doesn't." Elias leaned forward. "It hasn't attempted breach. Not once. Not even when injured. That tells us something." Halrick's gaze hardened. "It tells us we still control the situation." Elias did not argue further. He had learned when silence carried more weight than words. The first attempt on his life came 2 cycles later. A maintenance hatch sealed behind him as he crossed an auxiliary corridor, the lights dimming to emergency red. Elias stopped walking, heart rate climbing as his wrist console chirped a warning. Atmospheric pressure fluctuated, subtle but deliberate. An accident, the logs would say. A regrettable malfunction. The pressure normalized before it reached lethal levels. When the lights returned, Elias found the corridor occupied by 3 security officers who looked as startled as he felt. Above them, cameras replayed the footage in stunned loops. A massive shadow had moved through the station's internal architecture, navigating access ways too narrow for its bulk, exerting force with surgical precision. The Predator had intervened. No alarms had sounded. No bulkheads had been breached. The attempt had simply failed. After that, no one tried again. Elias altered his routines not out of fear but necessity. He spent longer hours in the containment chamber, documenting behavioral shifts. The Predator responded to his presence with something that approached anticipation. When Elias was late, its vitals spiked. When he arrived, they settled. "You're mapping me," Elias said one day, half amused, half wary. "That's only fair. I'm mapping you too." He began leaving the containment field at minimal strength during treatment, enough to protect him but not enough to fully separate them. The Predator noticed immediately. It lowered its head, a gesture that sent a ripple of alarm through the observation deck. Submission, some thought. Elias knew better. Trust was being tested. The data Elias uncovered painted a picture the Coalition would never release. The Predator's species structured conflict around obligation and restraint. They fought wars to end wars, not to erase enemies. Civilian casualties were taboo. Planetary annihilation was failure, not victory. The Coalition's war doctrine, by comparison, looked crude. When Elias presented his findings, the response was swift and cold. His access was restricted. His reports were classified beyond his clearance. A new directive circulated, one that used gentler language but carried unmistakable intent. Termination and repurposing. Elias returned to the containment chamber knowing it might be the last time. The Predator sensed it immediately. Its posture shifted, muscles coiling beneath layered hide. The restraints groaned, not from strain but from readiness. "They're afraid of you," Elias said. "And they should be. But not for the reasons they think." He keyed a private channel, bypassing station protocols. "They're going to cut you apart. Learn how to make more of you." The Predator's eye dimmed slightly, an expression Elias had come to recognize as contemplation. "I can help you leave," Elias continued. "But once we do this, there's no coming back. They'll call it betrayal. They'll hunt us both. The predator leaned forward until the containment field shimmered between them. Slowly, deliberately, it lowered its head again, exposing the scarred ridge along its neck. Acceptance. Elias exhaled, a tight smile pulling at his lips. "All right then," he said. "Let's teach them what a life debt looks like." Somewhere deep in the station, power grids began to reroute, and the war, patient and listening, adjusted its course. Elias moved through the auxiliary corridors with a precision born of necessity. Every step, every glance had a purpose. Alarms had been muted, cameras looped, and pressure sensors temporarily recalibrated. He was not just a scientist anymore. He was a fugitive on the edge of survival, escorting the galaxy's deadliest predator out of the Coalition's grasp. The predator followed him silently, restrained by nothing but the unspoken bond they had forged. Its massive form fit through the corridors with uncanny care, each movement deliberate, almost reverent. Elias had thought he understood its intelligence, but watching it navigate the station as if it had memorized every bolt, every ventilation shaft, revealed depths beyond his comprehension. At the junction before the main hangar, Elias paused. The security force was heavier here. The exit point was shielded by armed patrols and automated defense turrets. A direct confrontation would be suicide. He crouched behind a maintenance console, heart hammering, and keyed a private channel to the predator. "Wait here," he whispered. "I need to disable the turrets." The predator's head tilted slightly, but it did not move. Elias knew it understood him perfectly. He moved silently through the maintenance conduits, following schematics memorized in hours of desperate planning. Sweat ran down his spine, but his hands did not tremble. Focus was survival. Minutes later, he emerged behind the turret control panel. His fingers danced across the interface, overriding security protocols with a skill honed over years of xenobiological research. Lights flickered as the turrets powered down, one by one. Behind him, a subtle vibration told him the predator was still watching, waiting for his signal. "Now," he said, and the predator moved. It was a fluid motion, fast and terrifying. It crossed the corridor in a heartbeat, neutralizing two guards before they even drew their weapons. Elias glimpsed its claws slicing through restraints and barriers, but not a drop of blood spilled unnecessarily. Every strike was calculated, precise. A predator, yes, but disciplined beyond anything military doctrine had ever accounted for. Elias followed, using the chaos to his advantage. Every lock disengaged, every bulkhead opened, brought them closer to freedom. Yet even as they moved, Elias could feel the weight of the Coalition's power pressing in. They would not allow a predator of this caliber to escape. They never did. The hangar bay came into view, massive and empty, except for the sleek lines of a shuttle primed for departure. Elias ran, heart pounding in rhythm with the predator's massive strides behind him. He keyed the launch controls, overriding safety interlocks. A siren wailed, deep and resonant, echoing across the metal expanse. The first shots rang out as Coalition soldiers arrived. Elias ducked behind the shuttle's hull, watching as the predator reacted instantly. It moved between him and the soldiers, each swipe and maneuver carefully measured. Bodies were incapacitated, not destroyed. The alien's restraint was terrifying. Elias realized in that moment the predator's intelligence extended beyond strategy. It understood morality, or at least a code of survival that avoided unnecessary death. He climbed into the shuttle, starting the engine sequence. The predator followed, its bulk filling the cockpit with almost palpable presence. Elias's hands flew over the controls, heart hammering as the hangar doors began to seal. A final barrage of plasma fire lit the corridor behind them, but the shuttle shuddered and rose, evading capture. In the relative silence of space, Elias allowed himself a breath. The predator sat opposite him, reflecting the distant stars. No words were exchanged, but a mutual understanding filled the cockpit. They were not allies by choice. They were bound by circumstance and a recognition of competence and trust. Elias studied the ship's navigation console. Their path would take them through contested systems, into sectors where Coalition forces would hunt them relentlessly. But the predator did not hesitate. Its focus was absolute, its confidence in his decisions unshakable. Elias realized that in saving it, he had not only earned a debt but a partner in ways he had never anticipated. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional diagnostic chime. Elias reflected on the Coalition's war, the indiscriminate tactics, the political maneuvering, the calculated cruelty. He had seen enough to know that the predator's species was losing not for lack of strength, but for adherence to principles the Coalition considered weaknesses. The shuttle emerged from a nebula, revealing a contested system below. Coalition patrols crisscrossed the void, their formations tight and unforgiving. Elias adjusted the shields, preparing for evasive maneuvers. He glanced at the Predator, whose gaze was fixed on the fleet. In that moment, Elias understood the depth of what he had undertaken. They were not merely fleeing, they were changing the calculus of an entire war. Suddenly, a transmission cut through the static. Haurix's voice, sharp and incredulous, filled the cockpit. "Dr. Vorn, you cannot escape. Return the organism immediately, or we will destroy the vessel. You understand the consequences." Elias's jaw tightened. "We understand," he replied evenly. "But consequences will not dictate who survives today." The Predator's massive shoulder pressed lightly against the console, as if acknowledging the statement. Elias felt the weight of its presence not as a burden but as reassurance. Together they were more than a scientist and a creature. They were a force the Coalition had not anticipated, a variable that could not be calculated or contained. As the patrol ships closed in, Elias activated the shuttle's emergency thrusters. The vessel surged forward, weaving between asteroids and debris, each maneuver more desperate than the last. Behind him, the Predator's movements synchronized with the shuttle's rhythm, a silent testament to the understanding they had forged. In the cockpit's low light, Elias realized the truth: they were no longer running from the war. They were running toward it, armed not with weapons but with knowledge, strategy, and the unbreakable bond of a life debt. The galaxy would soon learn that the Predator they feared most had chosen a human, and in doing so had reshaped the rules of engagement entirely. As the shuttle disappeared into the shadow of a gas giant, the stars stretched into streaks of light, and Elias felt the first spark of a reckoning taking shape. The war was no longer the Coalition's to command, it had become theirs to rewrite. The Predator did not speak, yet Elias understood its commands perfectly. It moved through its own fleet as if it had been born inside the ships, its massive form weaving between alien warcraft with uncanny precision. Every maneuver, every calculated shift in trajectory revealed a mind that had studied conflict for lifetimes, except now it moved in tandem with a human's instinct for improvisation. Elias monitored the fleet's communications, picking up fragmented transmissions from both the Predator's forces and Coalition ships. Their enemies still underestimated them, believing the shuttle-bound scientist incapable of influencing the outcome. Elias allowed himself a faint, grim smile. Underestimation was a weapon humans wielded far too effectively. The Predator's people were waiting in orbit around a contested world, a system the Coalition had used as a staging ground for civilian intimidation. Their ships were fewer, but their discipline rivaled the galaxy's elite fleets. As the Predator joined its kin, Elias observed their reactions. Respect was immediate. Fear, yes, but not blind terror, something deeper. Recognition. "You understand them," Elias murmured, more to himself than to the Predator. "You always have." The Predator shifted its gaze toward him, multifaceted eyes reflecting starlight. A subtle vibration ran through its frame, a gesture Elias had learned meant agreement. The Predator had no use for flattery or pleasantries. It communicated through action, and Elias had adapted. The first strike came not as violence but as precision. Coalition supply lines were severed in a series of near-surgical operations, disabling weapon platforms without harming civilian infrastructure. Each move was deliberate, each success recorded in real time by Elias, who guided small adjustments from the shuttle's command interface. They were rewriting the war in a way no one had predicted. Elias began to notice a pattern. The Predator's strategy mirrored human asymmetric tactics. Distract, disrupt, redirect. Do not destroy unless necessary. Avoid attrition unless it serves a greater purpose. Elias realized then that he had taught the Predator something invaluable, an instinct for subtlety, a recognition that warfare could be won without erasing those who stood in the way. In a quiet moment aboard the command bridge, Elias accessed a series of encrypted Coalition logs. Entire campaigns had collapsed not because of brute force, but because the Predator's new strategies exposed weaknesses no one had noticed. Political unrest, miscommunications, and public dissent spread like wildfire. The war was fracturing from the inside out. He looked at the Predator and allowed himself a thought he had refused before. "You're not just repaying me," he said quietly. "You're amplifying everything humans stand for." The Predator responded with a slow rotation of its head, the gesture almost imperceptible but filled with meaning. Elias understood it as acknowledgement, perhaps even admiration, not for him personally but for the principle he represented. Coalition commanders panicked. Fleets that had seemed invincible were forced into defensive postures. Entire planets considered surrender rather than risk annihilation from an opponent whose motives were inscrutable. The Predator's new doctrine made humans central to every strategic calculation, not as soldiers, but as arbiters of restraint and consequence. Elias adjusted the fleet's approach to a heavily fortified system. His input was simple: minimize destruction, preserve infrastructure, protect civilians. The Predator executed the plan flawlessly, its ships moving as extensions of human thought, almost as if the life debt had fused their instincts into a singular operational unit. When the first Coalition flagship attempted an aggressive maneuver, the Predator intercepted without firing a shot. It trapped the vessel in a kinetic web of gravitational tugs, forcing it to drift helplessly while its own systems jammed under precise electronic manipulation. Elias watched in awe as entire command protocols unraveled, not through combat, but through strategy, presence, and the Predator's understanding of both fear and respect. In the following cycles, Elias became more than an advisor. He was an architect, a strategist shaping the Predator's decisions, and through it reshaping the war itself. The galaxy had never seen a force act with such controlled power. The Predator's species had always been lethal, but now lethality was directed with purpose rather than instinct. At one point, Elias accessed a civilian communication network. He broadcasted evidence of the Coalition's indiscriminate operations and the humane restraint of the Predator's forces. Outrage spread across colonies, stoking rebellion, and forcing the Coalition to reconsider every engagement. The Predator did not command the humans' actions, but it amplified them, turning strategy into a weapon that required no guns, no fleets, no slaughter. As they approached the contested world's orbital rings, Elias felt the weight of what they had accomplished. Entire systems had shifted their allegiances. Civilian casualties were minimal. Strategic dominance had passed from brute force into the hands of precision, empathy, and the quiet brilliance of a single human mind working in tandem with the galaxy's deadliest predator. The Predator turned toward him one final time in that operation cycle, the eye locking onto his face. Elias did not flinch. Instead, he felt a deep, unspoken promise in the gaze. The war would continue, yes, but under new rules. Humanity's influence was no longer theoretical, it was operational. And then, as if to punctuate the moment, the Predator executed a maneuver that disabled an entire Coalition fleet's offensive array without a single casualty. Elias realized the full scale of the lesson he had imparted. Victory did not require annihilation. It required understanding, adaptation, and the willingness to enforce consequence with precision. The operation concluded, and for the first time the Predator rested in orbit, its massive frame coiled in the vacuum as Elias reviewed the outcomes. Systems had shifted, fleets had faltered, and the Coalition had been forced to reconsider every engagement plan. Elias allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They had not only survived, they had rewritten the rules. The Predator's attention remained on the galaxy, vigilant, patient, but now it included Elias in its calculations. A life debt had been repaid, yes, but it had evolved into something far more formidable: partnership. Elias exhaled, leaning back against the console. The universe had changed. He had changed it. And the Predator, silent and immense, reminded him that they were not done yet. Every decision, every strategy, every choice would ripple through the stars. The war was no longer simply fought, it was being redefined. And they were the architects. The galaxy had learned to hesitate. Entire fleets waited at the edge of systems, unsure of when to strike, uncertain how to calculate the unpredictable fusion of human cunning and Predator instinct. Elias stood on the command bridge, hands resting lightly on the railing, eyes fixed on the sprawling map of contested worlds. Every blinking marker told a story. Coalition supply lines cut, civilian populations protected, enemy forces neutralized without unnecessary bloodshed. The Predator moved through its fleet with the same silent authority Elias had come to recognize. Ships responded to its presence almost instinctively, executing maneuvers it had never needed to voice. Elias had once feared that controlling a Predator so lethal would be impossible, but now he realized control was irrelevant. Mutual understanding was stronger than dominance. "You've done more than repay a debt," Elias said quietly, almost to himself. "You've changed the rules of war." The Predator turned its massive head, eye reflecting the distant stars, a gesture that Elias interpreted as acknowledgement. No words passed between them, yet a deep comprehension hung in the vacuum of space. They were partners, strategists, and arbiters of consequence all at once. Coalition leaders, scrambling for a coherent response, attempted to rally their remaining forces for a decisive strike. They underestimated the synergy of predator discipline and human ingenuity. Elias anticipated every move, guiding small adjustments while the predator executed the larger strategy. The result was a ballet of destruction and restraint, precision without cruelty. As they approached the heart of the coalition's stronghold, alarms flared across enemy channels. Entire fleets shifted orientation, attempting to encircle the predator's forces, but it had already predicted their path, cutting off reinforcements before they could arrive. Elias felt a surge of exhilaration. Strategy had replaced firepower, intelligence had become the deadliest weapon in the galaxy. The flagship, massive and bristling with weapons, broke formation to intercept them. Its captain, a veteran of countless wars, had never encountered an adversary who calculated empathy into tactics. Elias keyed the targeting arrays, feeding real-time adjustments into the predator's maneuvers. With every correction, the flagship's attacks missed, its formation unraveling as if pulled by invisible threads. The predator extended a clawed limb toward the flagship's trajectory, not to destroy but to disable. Magnetic fields bent around critical systems, propulsion units stalled, and life support began regulated failures, temporary, controlled, non-lethal. The flagship drifted helplessly into an orbit that left it isolated, its weapons offline. Elias felt a chill as he realized the magnitude of their power. They could annihilate but chose not to. Below the command deck, civilian broadcasts of the engagement began to circulate, showing restraint in the midst of overwhelming force. Colonists on worlds previously occupied by coalition forces erupted with relief and cautious optimism. Resistance movements gained traction almost instantly. Elias understood then that the predator had not only repaid a life debt, it had reshaped the moral compass of an entire conflict. The climax came when a final wave of coalition reinforcements arrived, attempting a desperate pincer maneuver. Elias predicted the trajectory, guiding the predator's fleet with minute adjustments that made the impossible possible. The reinforcements were trapped between gravitational tugs and coordinated countermaneuvers, forced to surrender without a shot fired. Entire systems shifted allegiance in that single cycle. Elias exhaled, a long, steady release of tension. He had never imagined that saving one being could ripple outward to affect galactic politics, military strategy, and civilian morale simultaneously. Yet here they were, the human who had healed a predator, and the predator who had redefined war itself. The predator approached him, each step measured, deliberate. Its massive form filled the bridge, yet Elias felt no fear, only the weight of understanding and respect. The eye met his, multifaceted and deep, and in that gaze was an acknowledgement that transcended species. What had begun as a life-saving act had become a partnership that no force in the galaxy could break. "You've learned more from me than I from you," Elias said, voice low but steady. "But I've learned everything that matters." A low vibration ran through the predator's frame. Elias felt it resonate in his chest. No words were spoken, none were needed. Every calculation, every decision, every risk had been acknowledged and internalized. They had not only survived the war, they had reshaped it, turning fear into strategy, strength into restraint, and instinct into moral authority. The galaxy fell silent, not out of peace but out of realization. Systems that had trembled under coalition dominance now reconsidered the meaning of power. It was no longer brute force, no longer indiscriminate terror. It was intelligence, empathy, and the audacity of a single human willing to act when all others hesitated. Elias stood at the railing, watching fleets align with unprecedented coordination. The predator's massive head turned toward him one final time. A subtle nod, almost imperceptible, sealed their unspoken agreement. This war and every war after it would never be the same. The stars stretched infinitely beyond the viewport, streaking as the predator executed the final strategic maneuver to secure victory. The galaxy's deadliest predator, guided by the human who had healed it, had not merely survived. It had rewritten the laws of engagement, demonstrating that even in the darkest reaches of conflict, restraint and understanding could wield more power than annihilation. Elias exhaled once more, a small smile forming on his face. For the first time in cycles he allowed himself to feel hope. The predator rested near the bridge, massive form coiled but alert, eyes reflecting both stars and the promise of what was to come. Humanity had altered the galaxy, not through conquest but through courage, intelligence, and the willingness to see life as more than a casualty. And somewhere deep within the quiet hum of space, a new era began, one written not in fire or blood, but in the unbreakable bond between a human and the deadliest predator in known space.